let's talk about some Space Marine points cuts, with Hellblasters, Aggressors and Heavy Intercessors all taking drops. How are these guys looking on the tabletop? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd do a focus one talking about the points cuts from the latest balance update, go through all the things that went down in cost in the codex, perhaps where they were before in terms of power and use wise, and whether or not that's meaningfully changed at all. Space Marines as normal tend to be a bit of an unusual army in terms of balance and army performance, around about 47% win rates or so prior to the update, so kind of mid-tier as 40k goes. Really quite popular to put on the table with the sheer amount of people collecting them, and for competitive armies played, it tends to be the Gladius Task Force that we're seeing the most use, with Ironstorm and Vanguard also being pretty successful and popular. With Guilliman and Calgar having the rules that they did though, it did seem that the vast majority of people who were actually doing well with the faction at tournaments tended to be running Ultramarines. And it felt a bit more notable and interesting when someone managed to do well with something else. Definitely still feels like it's Ultramarines and then the rest of the Space Marine chapters on slightly different power levels, though at least they compete better against the Divergent chapters having that boosted Oath of moment now. It seems in the balance update they broadly got a small buff for the most part, though for the Ultramarines it maybe felt more like a side grade, a couple of small rules nerfs accompanied by points cuts to their two powerful characters. I thought for this one we could go through each of the Space Marine units that went down in cost in the balance update, and talk about how meaningful the points changes could be for them. First up, we had a very tiny points cut for the Primaris Hellblasters, 110 points for 5 of them, or 220 for 10 now. They're the Marines armed with their plasma incinerators, general purpose plasma fire at 24-inch range with the assault and heavy keywords. They're almost always going to be at least somewhat effective against whatever target that you point them at, though without additional buffs like lethal hits or boosted Oath of moment, they're probably just going to deal some chip damage to tougher monsters and vehicles. I feel like in 10th edition they've often been a unit that's a bit easier to use and perhaps stronger in casual play than outright competitive for the most part. Just hard to go wrong with a whole bunch of dangerous plasma fire, and you get the sort of consolation prize of when you shoot them down they can do a bunch of damage in the enemy turn, potentially lighting up some things that have yet to deal damage yet. So if the opponent doesn't think around that and manage that well, then it could be a great way to get extra value from them even if they all get destroyed. When they get used for competitive play, it generally tends to be in a big squad with some investment, maybe a lieutenant, perhaps with fire discipline in the past, and Azrael of the Dark Angels is another possible choice, giving a 4+ invulnerable save and his sustained hits, or maybe doing something like Librarius Conclave with a regular Librarian, again for the invulnerable save and a potential damage boost. For one of those combo units, it might be nice to deliver them in a repulsor, unless you've got some other detachment-specific way of getting them to their targets. They did tend to be maybe kind of niche for Space Marine lists in general, perhaps a bit too much of an element of being jack of all trades, master of none. It's almost always going to achieve something, but maybe not crazy amounts for their points costs. In any case, the points change for them wasn't enormous, dropping down just 5 points per 5, so a not super meaningful 4% points drop there. At first impressions, I guess that's not going to be enough to move the needle on them in a big way, though at the same time I'd argue they weren't awful before, and maybe this could be all the nudge they need for a few more people to take some big 10 strong combos. They definitely won't be catapulted to auto-include in every Space Marine list or anything like that though. Next up, a unit that people have wanted points cuts for a long time for are the Aggressors. They're Gravis armoured Space Marines, usually with a bunch of damage, getting some twin links volume fire at close range with extra AP against their nearest targets, and then some fairly general purpose power fist melee as you get twin linked, so they're a bit better at punching up against tough stuff compared with some of their contemporaries. In 10th edition they started out as one of the units to build around fairly early on, with things like Gladius Fire Discipline in Land Raiders often enjoying them, or maybe Calgar and a Biologist infiltrating them in Vanguard Spearhead, but it seems that Games Workshop just hit them with repeated nerfs, points increases to the unit themselves, their Apothecary Biologist going up in points cost by quite a large amount, and the Fire Discipline combo first going up in points, and then having the main big lethal and sustained hits combo get taken away. That's basically left them almost completely unplayed in strong Space Marine lists pre-update for the 120 points or 240 points that they were before. I feel like maybe on paper most tempting, perhaps in Firestorm, where they can make pretty good use of the stratagems, maybe alongside a captain jumping out of a repulsor or similar. In any case, Aggressors definitely got some more meaningful points cuts. For these guys, the small unit dropped more, which I think makes sense given that nobody tended to run them in 3s. It's now just 100 points for 3 Aggressors as opposed to 120, so a big 17% drop on the small units. I really don't know if that would be enough to tempt people to run those in small squads unbuffed though. It still feels like most of the time you'd probably struggle to get them into their target without a transport or some other delivery thing. And for that investment, you probably want them to hit as hard as possible once they get there. It certainly makes the small squad a bit more interesting though. Maybe it could be a little more tempting as a counter-attack style unit. The larger unit of 6 that people tended to take more though, that only dropped by 8%, so down to 220 from 240. Though I guess if you count the overall combo including any attached characters, the points decrease will be less than that percentage-wise. Going forward, I'd be a bit surprised if they're going to be any major feature in optimised Space Marine lists. They've definitely got a solid move in the right direction if you do want to make them work on the tabletop. Still maybe feels like the most obvious will be the big 6 unit with character support. The small squad certainly seems interesting enough in damage for the points, just perhaps not super clear what role you usually want them to fulfill in an army list perhaps. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to Toy Snowman, a gaming store in Canada that sponsored the video. They're based in Montreal and are a big general purpose gaming store with a huge amount of collectibles, who in recent months have been gradually increasing their stock and supplies of Warhammer 40k. They sell Warhammer miniatures at 15% off, and here's the address of their store if you do happen to live somewhere in the area to check them out. Their web store's fairly easy to search, I'd usually go by that to find 40k things. They have a bunch of the usual support for discount store things. If there's any Warhammer miniatures that you want them to order in that they don't have in stock, you can do so via this email. They've got free shipping over $150 Canadian, and they have a reward scheme points program. For the big Kill Team Typhon release this weekend, they should be aiming to get good stock of that. They're putting in a big order to get quite a lot of the sets from Games Workshop, though as ever will depend as to whether or not Games Workshop deliver on those requests. Could be another place in Canada to check out for those though. In any case though, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like some cheaper Warhammer in Canada. Getting back to those Space Marine points decreases though, and next up we have the Heavy Intercessors. They seem to be a unit that Games Workshop's often struggled to get right and make strong in game. I think they just tend to have a stat line and unit rules that tend to go with them, probably getting strong and oppressive in casual play before they get good in competitive. They're a pretty tough unit with 3 Gravis wounds for not really all that many points, and since the December rules update for them they have very punchy bolt rifles, all of them getting strength 5, AP 1, damage 2, so firing with the force of heavy bolter shells there, which people were really quite interested about at the time, though Games Workshop also increased their points when they gave them that, and that really took the shine off any sort of boost that they had, and they weren't particularly widely played before. Basically since then I haven't really seen anyone using them in competitive Space Marine armies. Space Marines just have an enormous amount of competition for the small unit skirmisher style role, things that can fight with enemy infantry, ideally while providing extra utility to the army, and for the vast majority of people, Heavy Intercessors were really quite low down the priority list for that kind of thing. They're still not really standout damage dealers, given that the Strength 5 Damage 2 profiles are pretty good against standard Space Marine things and lighter but not really tougher stuff, and in particular perhaps they compared really quite poorly against standard Intercessors. Their double firing rule gave them some good damage output, and they've got the Grenade Launcher and Power Fist. Being a cheaper unit, they can hold objectives for cheaper, and they have that rather great sticky objectives rule, meaning that was all draws to run them rather than these. In this last update though, the Heavy Intercessors have got a pretty meaningful points cut, going down from 110 to 100 points, so 9% dropped overall. And it really is getting to the point where you get a lot of stats for the cost now. They are genuinely quite standout tough as Space Marines go. Special weapons and anti-tank weapons will still have a good time against them, but maybe the edge of that is taken off by the fact that you're still only losing 20-point models now at most. They definitely have some interest for sort of being a skirmish unit plus. Fairly likely to be able to go 1-for-1 and win against the majority of their peers. Anything standard Space Marine size is almost certainly not going to beat them in a straight gunfight. I feel like if you want to put them in a list, they're probably not going to be a terrible idea. I still think for more optimised Space Marine lists, probably other things are going to get the nod first. I still think that even at 20 points difference between the regular Intercessors, they're still going to get taken first between the double shooting, the sticky objectives, and just being a cheaper unit for objectives. And Space Marines have a massive amount of utility units that add value at a sort of a game level, with scouts skirmishing in the mid-board, infiltrators denying deep strike, incursors buffing an entire gun line shooting potentially, and lots of other things like that. It just means that a lot of those units might have a standout value for their points beyond what they can defend and kill. Between all that, I'd still expect them to be rarely seen in competitive lists, but definitely have some interest just from the sheer weight of stats they can put on the board. I can imagine them being a pretty intimidating prospect for an opponent to take out if the opponent goes heavy with a few squads of these, perhaps causing problems with scraping that sheer amount of Gravis wounds off the primaries, while they do some good chip damage with those heavy bolters, potentially really good damage against ideal targets. Next up we have maybe one of the biggest on-paper winners from the balance updates. Vanguard Veterans dropped down to 95 points per 5 of them, or 190 per 10. I feel like these guys were maybe just a little bit suspicious to come back big for a unit that had been bumped up in points so much to make them a bit irrelevant for a while. Are widely expected to get some updated Primaris models, I'd say within the next year or so. Feels like there'd be very good odds for them turning up towards the start of 11th edition in a starter set or Space Marine Codex release. In any case, at the moment, they're not really so different in role to the Jump Intercessors. 2 wound jump infantry with deep strike, and the damage profile gives mass strength 5, AP 1, damage 1 attacks with lethal hits on the charge. A bit disappointing for all the fancy power weapons that they can take, and means that against the vast majority of targets the Jump Intercessors are going to do better, with a Power Fist to punch through heavier armour, and those mortal wound impact hits to give them a bit more bite against tough stuff. These guys do have a selling point though. Either they can take a bunch of fancy pistols. I feel like all three of them do actually have some arguments, though if you can get in range with the Mass Inferno pistols, they do add some genuinely quite big damage threats, though perhaps I feel like I've seen more people use them with Storm Shields, so you essentially get jump intercessors with a slightly decreased damage profile but a 4+ invulnerable save, so they are going to be harder to take out on the counter attack. At 110 points, I think that was just too much for them. They're very, very rarely played in strong lists, maybe occasionally for a big unit of 10 with Strike or a Jump Captain, but they've had a pretty massive and meaningful points cut, down 15 points per 5 at both unit sizes, so a 14% drop there. I'd say that's easily enough to go from bad to interesting. They're only 5 points more than Jump Intercessors, and Jump Intercessors were making their way into a whole bunch of competitive lists. Definitely feels like they could be a reasonable enough rival for them now. If you want squads to drop for secondaries, then these could drop in and then be harder to take down for the opponents, weighed up against the extra damage that the Jump Intercessors can do. Any of the chapters that can access some interesting melee buffs could do well with them, though Blood Angels in particular might find them very interesting. They often tended to have 3 units of 5 Jump Intercessors in a list for skirmishing and hitting hard on the charge. Now Vanguard Veterans are around about the same price. You could have 6 units of 5 jump pack troops in Liberator for skirmishing. That would still be less than 600 points, plenty of room for other stuff like Sanguinary Guard and some bigger hitting threats and shooting. Overall they feel like a solid winner out of this. Feels like a good change for balance, a unit that went from bad to looking rather usable again. Though still not say that they stand out or to include strong due to the rivalry with the Jump Intercessors. Potentially to lead them or Jump Intercessors, we've got the Jump Captain. He dropped down from 85 points to 75. I guess in theory a 13% points cut, though I feel like for characters maybe the percentage drop isn't the best way to look at it, given that you normally bind them alongside a squad, so it's maybe the decrease of the overall unit that matters more. In any case, the Jump Captain contributes with 5 fist or hammer attacks, a discounted stratagem per turn, and they give their lead unit a +1 strength on the charge, so taking Vanguard Veterans up to strength 6, which is quite a nice breakpoint, or Jump Intercessors up to strength 5. In particular, he saw really quite a lot of use with Blood Angels again. Interesting enough, with a 10 strong Jump Intercessor unit, though for Blood Angels they got on well with Sanguinary Guard as well, often being used in Angelic Inheritors. For more general purpose Space Marines though, I have seen them used from time to time. Maybe kind of interesting in a 10 strong Jump Intercessor unit, they only cost 160 points, so you get them at a slight discount if fielding them in the damage dealer style role, though maybe rivaled with the Chaplain who helps them out against tougher stuff with a +1 to wound that they bring. 10 points cheaper is definitely helpful for him though. Both the big Jump Intercessor squads and maybe Vanguard Veterans now that they're a bit more of a credible thing. I could see them being a nice enough alternative if you did want to build a big unit, and feels like the Power Fist attacks, plus potentially getting up to Strength 6 is quite a big deal for them, and they'll be harder to take out on the attack back. Seems absolutely great for Blood Angels though alongside all of their other changes, particularly Sanguinary Guard dropping down to that slightly crazy 110 points. Almost every combination of jump packs that you can field there got cheaper. Finally, we've got the Ultramarines changes, and these ones were the only arguable nerfs or side grades, though at the same time they too dropped down in points. Marnius Calgar dropped down from 210 points to 200. He generates command points in a big way, has a nice bit of melee threat between his own profile and his honour guards, and between them they can make a rather big chunky Death Star unit, often seen with company heroes, quite liking their defensive profiles and the -1 to wound when paired with those already good Victrix guard profiles. The change to him though was that you can no longer generate those command points unless he's actually a warlord, and that basically means that he's just no longer really worth that big 200 points unless you're fielding him as that. So basically if you're trying to build a strong list, it's going to be the choice between him or Guilliman, and not having both in the same army as plenty of people were doing before. Guilliman for his part dropped down to 320 points, so a big 7% cut. Pretty good news for such a big central and competitive model. He brings his big melee stats, the chance to revive on death, the doubled up Oath of Moment if you can destroy your first targets to move on to a second nominated one, and now just one discounted stratagem within the 12 inches aura as opposed to one per turn. It basically means for the points cut, you have probably lost several command points worth of free stuff, though in theory at least you will still be able to save that discounted stratagem for the time when it matters the most for the units nearby, whether it's going to be something reactive or something proactive and dealing damage in your turn. Despite the points cut, I'd overall say it's probably still a very slight nerf to him, but honestly not really by quite as much as I might have expected, given that he's quite a game warping model and seems to be one of the things drawing people to Ultramarines. That still brings far more value when you had to choose either the free stratagem or doubled up Oath of Moment. Now you can still have both, but you only get the one discounted stratagem. Overall feels more like a side grade than a downgrade for Ultramarines. It'll be interesting to see which of the two characters people choose to build around, whether it will be Guilliman or Calgar. I still suspect the majority of strong Space Marine lists will choose either one or the other and go Ultramarines for ones that do well at big tournaments and things. I'd honestly still expect some will choose one and some will choose the other, as they're both pretty good and fairly reasonable to build around for their points cost. Overall, is at first impressions it maybe feels like the sort of changes that's made individual units better for the Space Marines that might not necessarily add all that much army strength to their top builds. I'd guess they're likely to be fairly similarly powerful to where they were before. Certainly seems good news for people who want to make some of their most standard Primaris units work on the tabletop though. I feel like Aggressors, Hellblasters and Heavy Intercessors are generally units that people want to see strong. I feel like they certainly had room to manoeuvre where they could do points costs without making them overpowered or anything. Let me know your thoughts on the Space Marine updates though, and whether it's changed anything for your list building going forward. I'll leave that one there for now though. As mentioned, a big thank you to Toy Snowman for sponsoring the video. You can find them links down in the video description if you'd like to pick up some cheaper Warhammer in Canada. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep them coming regularly with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel and keep the videos coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links on the video description down below. Channel patrons do get a few advantages as well, seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the prize giveaway with a chance to win some big model kits every month. If any of that sounds good or you'd just like to check it out, the link's down in the video description. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.